Thank you, Mr. Speakers and ladies and gentlemen of this House. I want to come to you and talk to you today from my perspective as someone who at one point was the youngest county commission chairman in the state. Back about 30 years ago, it was a different day in public service, especially as a local elected official. In those days, we thought that it was terrible to try to keep up with the demands of the public and to keep taxes low. But ever since then, we have experienced in this state and around the country an astronomical amount of growth in the desire for public services. And in Georgia, we have an unusual problem, and that's our problem of relying on property taxes. This isn't an issue that's unfamiliar to me. I'm very grateful to Representative Lindsey for bringing this bill up. I was grateful a couple of years ago when a young freshman from DeKalb County, Levitas, took an issue that I'd been introducing the bill for several years about freezing the valuation process. Now, I've heard a lot of the members in here today talk about backdoor tax increases. I've heard them talk about fairness. I've heard them talk about equality. But I want to tell you the truth about some things, folks. And if you heard what some of those speakers that spoke, and I have no doubt that they spoke from their heart, but they talked about fairness. But at the end of the day, they still resonated a message that we've got a system in this state that's broke. Quite simply, we've got a system that's broke. We talk about the backdoor tax increases. Well, that's what the reevaluation process has been for years. Now, I'm not up here to bash the local officials. I've always been one that's very much coming from the ranks of a local county commissioner. I've always been on their side for when I thought they were right. I've always been on the side of the school boards and the superintendents because they've got a mission, and that's to provide the best possible quality education, albeit it's under the jurisdiction that they have to live up to the rules and regs and the laws and the statutes created not only by this General Assembly but by those requirements of Washington laws and the officials in Washington. But we got a problem, ladies and gentlemen. I'm coming up here today, and I didn't wear a lapel pin today. I don't have an elephant, and I don't have a donkey on my lapel pin. I'm up here today to speak for property owners. Those people who own homes, that own businesses. The most precious freedom that's the foundation of this nation is the right and the ability and the desire to take your money, to own your home, to own a business, to own investment properties, to own a farm, all those things that was a foundation and the bedrock of what founded this nation. And what's eventually happening is that people are getting to the point that they can't afford to pay the property taxes. Local officials have inherited so many unfunded mandates by this and past General Assemblies and other bodies, rules and regulations and the like. But we've got to create some transparency. I'm not going to particularly use that word backdoor, but that's exactly what the idea of the increase each year that we have seen with the reevaluation process. I haven't seen many, have heard from many counties that in the downturn in the real estate market where most properties have been devalued 20 to 40%, I haven't heard a lot of people say that they've got to notice that their property values have gone down likewise. But it's part of the process, and we got a system that's broke, ladies and gentlemen. I heard someone say this is going to restrict what local officials can raise in the revenue for the support of their governments. I don't think that's exactly factual because there's no prohibition about raising the millage. Just raise the millage. There's the backdoor tax increase on the valuation process that I think has been talked about. Let's create some transparency. I heard so many people talk about fairness. I want to tell you about some fairness. I want to tell you about some property owners, and I'll go back to what originally ran me for public office when I was a young man and my beard wasn't gray. I remember an old lady, and property taxes, as you can imagine, 30 years ago probably wasn't anything like they are today. But I remember an old lady who had a 50-acre tract of land that her husband had died, and she was there living on a widow's pension or her Social Security. And I remember her telling me that her concern was that tax problem, that she had to make a decision a lot of times whether she was going to buy medicine or she was going to be able to pay her taxes. And invariably, she was so proud of the fact that that was her home, she was going to pay those taxes. We're in a recessionary economy today. I was talking to a friend of mine who was standing in the tax line up in Hart County last week, and he was talking about people who came in and didn't have enough money to pay their taxes, so they paid what they could pay and said that they would be back to pay the rest when they got it. Now, most people in this body are pretty prosperous. Most of y'all are doing very well, or hopefully you are. Most of y'all can pay your taxes all in one lump. You might turn your lip up. You ain't going to argue too much because y'all are elected and you don't want to have to take the blame for, fussing about your property taxes. But we got people out there, ladies and gentlemen, they cannot continue to pay the high price of these property taxes because we are in that recession, whether a lot of folks admit it or not.